Hello, viewers. Today I am brewing 9-stage spring wine, 九醞春酒. This is a 1,800-year-old written recipe, possibly the oldest known written recipe for rice wine. And today you're going to be able to see all 9 stages of brewing this rice wine, all 9 stages at the same time. If you like this video, please click that like button and subscribe, and please click the bell to be notified when I publish a new video on the subject of rustic Asian rice wine every week. I really appreciate you sharing this video wherever it is appropriate. Thank you for that. So this is the recipe right here. This is the whole recipe written down 1,800 years ago by Cao Cao, a very famous general and political power, warlord, and of great importance to Chinese history. This kind of rice wine is from Cao Cao's hometown, and so he presented this recipe along with wine to the emperor at the time. And so this is a historical document. If you want to know more, please watch my earlier video for details on the recipe and the translation. That's this video called, with the title, Divine Comedy, Stupid Music. You can see some of the details there. And I have brewed a small experiment of this recipe with 3 stages instead of 9. And that sort of worked, so I thought it was worth doing the full thing. I need to do 9 stages. Okay, so this is going to be ridiculous, but I really want to do it. So the way this recipe works, there's 9 stages. Every 3 days, I add the same amount of steamed rice. And in this recipe, there is more rice than water, but all the water is added at the start. So the first few stages ferment quite wet, but the last stages are fermenting in a quite dry environment, relatively dry. So that's an interesting consequence of having so many stages and having all the water at the start. We're going to see how that affects things. This is going to be a very special recipe. So when you think about it, okay, I'm going to be steaming rice 9 times. I could have made 9 separate brews with that, going to the effort of setting up the steamer and steaming rice. I could have made 9 brews, but I'm only going to make 1 brew. So why are there 9 stages? Well, like I said, 9 seems like a ridiculous number of stages, but maybe it's appropriately extreme to give to the emperor. I think some people have speculated that 9 is numerologically a good number. But the recipe actually says you can extend it to 10 stages if necessary. So that makes it seem like it's not just numerology to stick to 9 stages. If you can just add an extra stage if you feel like it, that doesn't sound like numerology. That just sounds like a recipe with an awful lot of stages. Let's see what happens. So let's brew. I will sanitize my fermentation jar, first of all, with Star San. I usually do this. I don't always show it on video. So I'm going to get my steamer ready. One special thing here, I added little handles here with twist ties, those white twist ties. That's going to let me lift out this layer of the steamer while it's still hot, because I'm going to be using these silicone mats to do the steaming instead of cloth. I do need to prepare the water and the enzymes, the wine cakes, 九醞 or 九醞, also known as Chinese yeast balls or Shanghai wine cakes. That's a traditional leavening agent, the fermentation starter, the enzymes that convert starch to sugar. And I'm also going to use some homemade nuruk for this. For one thing, I have it around. I might as well use some of it. This is for variety, also for flavor, and also for strength. I want to give this brew some character. The Shanghai yeast balls by themselves can be a bit plain, so I want to add some character to this. So that's why I'm adding some additional enzymes from my Nuruk, which is like going to be a wheat-based fermentation starter instead of rice-based. But that's only 5 grams. So it's about 40 grams of the Shanghai wine cakes and 5 grams of Nuruk for flavor and character. Grind that up into some kind of powder, and I'm going to add that to the water. That was 667 milliliters of water, and stir that up. I'm also going to add some wine yeast here. That's not in the original recipe, of course. They didn't have packets of yeast, but it's to keep things consistent, and so I have confidence that it's going to ferment. So that's preparing the fermentation starter. Now let's watch all 9 stages at the same time. So what are we seeing here? Yes, all 9 stages at the same time here. Each stage involves sweet rice, 133 grams of sweet rice. And in each stage, wash and drain repeatedly. It's just a small amount of rice, so it's actually easy to do that, to do the washing. And then cover it and let it soak for at least 3 hours. After that's done, then drain it, rinse it one more time, let it sit for half an hour, let it drain completely for half an hour now. Now that it's drained, we're going to put it on that silicone mat. And it's just a small amount of rice in the steamer here. It's easy to use the silicone mat to do the steaming. We're going to steam it for 35 minutes. That's a bit less than usual because it's such a small amount of rice. After 35 minutes, remove it from the steamer and lay it out on this rack, cloth on top of the rack here. Spread it out to cool to room temperature. And then put it in the jar. In the very first stage, add the liquid, the water, and the fermentation starter. And I'm going to stir that, and then put it in the cabinet, away from sunlight, at relatively cool temperatures, around 20 degrees Celsius. And then the next day, so the very first 2 or 3 days, want to stir that twice a day. Later on, you don't need to stir it. And you can see how the fermentation is progressing in each stage here. It actually gets going really quickly. And this is the second day after adding the rice. Looking good. But that's all 9 stages at the same time. Let's rewind. The reason I want to rewind is I want to watch the fermentation day by day. Day 1, I can see a lot has happened already. It's bubbling rapidly and a lot of liquid there. And on day 2, you can see distinct layers of rice. Layer of rice on top, clear layer, then rice on the bottom. Day 3, even more rice has fallen. So because there's so much water at the beginning, fermentation progresses really quickly and the bubbles are rapid. As time goes on, it's still fermenting. I still hear bubbles, but it slows down. And also the clear layers end up disappearing because I'm adding rice, another batch of steamed rice every 3 days. And it's, you can definitely see the bubbles of gas forming in there, but it's less liquid. Fermentation is slower. Less is happening. So that's the general way things progress. It smells good. And also I'm going to keep the lid relatively closed later on. Since there is an addition of rice every 3 days, that's enough stirring already. You don't need to do any more. We're at the last addition of rice here. And we're just going to after the last addition of rice, I'm just going to let it ferment for 3 more days, and then I'm going to bottle it. Day 27, It's time to bottle. So boil my filter bag, and I'll be able to, I made a small batch, even though there's 9 stages. Each stage is so small, it's not a lot, it's not a large batch. Stir it up. It's still a bit thick. I would have liked this to be more liquid, but that's the recipe. So dump it out into the filter bag. Okay, that's pretty good. And gonna have to squeeze this. And this does feel different than normal. This is difficult to squeeze through the filter bag. It's extra gooey. It's very gooey. You can even see some, it's coming out super thick out of the bag. That's not, so that's not great. The leaves are very wet. I wasn't able to squeeze them to a dry state. So the leaves weigh 736 grams. That's a lot, but they're extra wet. So what I really think here is that this could have fermented for longer, but I wanted to follow the recipe as written. Put the finished rice wine in the bottles. So I end up with less than 1.5 liters. I believe I could have had an easier time filtering this if I waited longer, maybe another 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something. But I wanted to follow the original recipe. Didn't want to modify it yet. And I'm going to taste this 3 days later. All right, let's get to the tasting. Okay, it's been 3 days, and I'm going to taste this 9-stage spring wine. This has settled. It looks like it has a very soft sediment layer, quite a large sediment layer. And that's likely a feature of how I brewed it, because it started off, because there's so many stages. It started off, it's so wet, it ferments so quickly at the beginning, but the last stage was only 3 days before bottling. So that last addition of rice did not have that long to turn into, to convert to sugar and to be fermented into alcohol. That last stage had very limited time to do that. So I don't think it was really complete. The end result should be something sweet, but it might be incompletely fermented because the last stage was so close to the end. So there's I'm just going to I'm going to drink the second bottle here. I'm going to mix this up. I don't think it's any use trying to drink just the clear wine. This wine is meant to be, according to the recipe, it's meant to be, you're meant to drink this cloudy, drink the sediment. And the instructions also said I could have gone for a 10th stage, but that was 9 is enough. Let's see what it's like with the 9 stages. Okay, so it looks thick. Just pouring it looks thick. And it smells sweet. And there's a little bit of sourness. Yeah. More of that citric acid kind of sourness. That could be because of the kind of wine yeast I added. If I remember right, that does produce that kind of aroma and taste. Okay, but it so I'm contrasting that citric kind of sourness with the lactic kind of sourness, which I do smell some of as well. But let's taste it. Maybe it'll be easier to detect. Okay, so it's not too thick. It is quite sweet. Yeah, that's the first thing I noticed. There's a lot more sugar in here than my normal brews. This must be the sweetest thing I've brewed. Yeah, I can taste it at the beginning, taste the sweetness at the end. This actually still has a mild flavor. When I was tasting a drop or two as it was brewing, for each time I stirred a new stage in, I tasted a drop or two. It tasted more harsh during the brewing process. Yeah, this doesn't taste harsh now. Yeah, it is surprisingly sweet. It doesn't taste that strong in alcohol, but that might be because the sugar is masking it. Yeah, it has a really sweet aftertaste too. Yeah, and it still tastes a bit like rice. Again, I think that's because the last few stages of this brew haven't had a chance to break down enough and ferment completely. Just didn't give it enough time. But I was trying to follow the recipe as written, despite the the problems of taking such an old recipe as it's handed down. Perhaps parts of it were lost, and it was written down very specifically by Cao Cao for the emperor. Of course, it's also possible that Cao Cao did not write everything about this, every important step in this recipe. Perhaps it would be better if this was allowed to brew a little longer, let those final stages get to complete their fermentation. On the other hand, if you really wanted a sweet brew, this is one way to do it. It was a lot of work, and it produces a very mild and thick wine, and a sweet wine. Yeah, but I think it has enough alcohol. It's a reasonable amount of alcohol. It's not weak, but the flavor is milder and more rice based, and definitely you have sweetness at the beginning and the end. I said it's far more sweet than the other than anything else I've brewed. There's a bit of tartness. Maybe there's some lactic flavor. I'm looking for the lactic flavor because that's what I like. That helps round out rice wine like this, is to have some lactic flavor at the end, not just sweetness. And the flavor is milder. It's more like one of those cloudy sakes, those nigori sakes. It's more like that, and the texture of the sediment is more like that too. That's interesting. So let me know what you think. Was it worth doing 9 stages to get this result? Let me know what you think in the comments. I did enjoy doing this, and I will enjoy drinking this. It did produce a different result than I've ever gotten before. Of course, I'm not sure this matches the ancient recipe in all details. In fact, I'm sure it doesn't match all the steps of the ancient recipe. But I did what I could, and it did produce an interesting result, unlike anything I have brewed before. So thank you for watching.